All right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this webinar titled Argentine Real Estate, a Primer for the Foreign Investor. My name is Rod Alop. I'm president of the Real Estate Committee at the Texas Argentina Chamber of Commerce, also managing partner of Houston Equity Partners, Houston-based commercial real estate investment company specialized in industrial, retail, and self-storage assets. Before we begin, a word on the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber is a non-for-profit organization with the mission of fostering commercial development between Texas and Argentina. It's comprised of 5 chapters: Houston, Dallas, Austin, Neuquén, and Buenos Aires, and it has 5 business sector committees: energy, health, food and beverage, innovation and technology, and real estate. Everyone can become a member of the chamber by visiting the website at Argentina-Texas.org. So with that said, today's presentation will cover the basic concept of how to invest in real estate in Argentina as a foreign investor. I will cover the process from offer to closing, some of the pitfalls that should be avoided, that can be avoided during the transaction, and a general state of the market in Argentina. For that purpose, we have joining us today Maximiliano Gotz. He's a licensed real estate broker in Argentina. He's also director of Gotz Negocios Inmobiliarios. He's a member of the Colegio Único de Corredores Inmobiliarios de la Ciudad de Buenos Aires, and he's a member of the National Association of Realtors in the US. So with that, welcome, Max. Good morning.
Thanks, Rod, very much. Good morning. And thank you for the presentation. Very good to be here. And good morning to everyone. So let's get started a little bit. Just basically, from what Rod had said, yes, we are licensed here in the city of Buenos Aires, the province of Buenos Aires, also a member of the National Association of Realtors in the United States. Studied brokerage degree here in Buenos Aires, went to law school briefly for a few years until I decided to work more in the real estate sector. I authored a book, an ebook on real estate, a guide for people looking to invest in Argentina, upon which this webinar is based on. And well, among other things, I'm the only licensed realtor to have hosted House Hunters International, which was a very fun experience here in Buenos Aires. So let's get started and first of all, discuss what the purpose of this webinar is going to be. We're going to look to give the foreign investor a clear outline of what property purchase encompasses from start to finish. We're going to look to offer an accurate assessment of what the real estate market is doing in Argentina and what it has been doing over the course of the last few years, during which we've had what can only be described as the longest buyer's market in Argentine real estate history. And of course, most importantly, warn about possible pitfalls along the way, in addition to explaining cultural, financial, and legal aspects of Argentine real estate and other nuances. Let me just see if I can really quickly minimize this. Sure. Okay. So 2 of the questions that we get asked a lot when a client reaches out to us are, is it easy for a foreigner to buy real estate in Argentina? How easy is it? How hard is it? The second most asked question is, can the government seize my property? Which has been a concern voiced several times. The answer to the first one is yes, it's easy enough. It's a process not unlike what you might find in other countries. But having said that, it is not complicated, but it is complex. And there is an ecosystem of people that you need to work with and knowledge of certain aspects of it, because at the end of the day, you're going through an investment in a different country, in a different culture, with a different language. To the second question, can the government seize my property? The answer to that is a resounding no. Private property, whatever issues Argentina may be faced with over the years, private property has always been something that has been respected and honored, even though there have been laws here and there from the city or from the province or in other municipal levels that have created doubts about that. But the Constitution is very clear about private property, whether you are an Argentine or you are a foreigner. We actually get a third question, which is asked a lot, because Argentina, for a number of years now, has been in everybody's lips. Not just, of course, the tourism aspect, because Buenos Aires and the country as a whole has a lot to offer, but because real estate has all of a sudden become an interesting asset to have in a country that has high inflation and where the dollar gets you a long way. So with that in mind, question, of course, is can I buy real estate in Argentine pesos with the dollar being 383 pesos to 1? And the answer to that, unfortunately, is a resounding no. Argentine real estate has been, since the 1970s, valued in US dollars. And as a very, very brief history lesson, the reason for that was Argentina has not been without its inflationary problems for the better part of half of the 20th century, latter half of the 20th century. And in the 70s, a finance minister up and determined that it would be a good idea to have real estate be valued in US dollars. Now, a lot of people warmed to this, obviously, because all of a sudden it became far more of a safe investment to have real estate valued in an international currency. So for us, ever since that time, real estate has been pretty much the equivalent of the gold standard for us. And there is also a historical and cultural mandate. Unlike, for example, the United States, where there are housing markets and there are mortgages and where one can access house, condo, apartment by virtue of a mortgage over a period of years, that does not exist in Argentina. So the only real way to purchase real estate is with cash on the barrelhead, just paying for it right then and there. We don't have 10, 20, 15-year mortgages. And Argentina comes from mostly Western European immigration, Italians primarily, and the historical mandate was always buy land, have land, similar to Manifest Destiny in the United States, if you want to draw a parallel. So with that in mind, as a foreigner, as an investor, what do you need to get the ball rolling in terms of buying real estate? Well, you need a valid passport and a second form of ID, and you need what's called a CDI, which is tantamount to a social security number or a tax ID number. And what it does is it replaces what we as Argentines have, which is called a quit, which is a tax ID number. And the CDI, it allows you to legally purchase real estate, but not just real estate, but really any registrable good, ships, planes, cars, expensive artwork, so forth. So why don't we discuss the process now from start to finish? And prior to that, as with any process, the first thing you want to determine is think of whether you're buying anything from a phone to a car to a property. What do I like? Well, I like something with a view. I like something in a determined area of town. I like something on a high floor. I like something on a low floor. What do I need? Well, I need something with 2 bedrooms because I work from home, so I need a home office. What do I want out of it? Maybe you're going to want to use it for a number of years. Maybe you're going to want to have it forever and have it passed on to your kids. You have to think about resale value, or maybe you don't because your thinking is to buy something here and stay here forever. You've got to think about the price objectively, and you have to think about the price subjectively. Now, what does this mean? Objectively, you have to think, well, what can I buy here that I cannot buy somewhere else? If you wanted to buy a 2-bedroom apartment in the Upper West Side of New York City, it would cost you substantially more than a 2-bedroom apartment in one of the better areas of Buenos Aires. Call it Recoleta, call it Palermo, call it Barrio Norte. And then you have to think about price subjectively, which of course is, can I afford this? Do I want to put the money here? Is it better to find another place? So in essence, you have 4 steps, which could be shortened to 3, but you've got 4 steps that comprise the process of buying real estate in Argentina. You make an offer, the offer is accepted, the signing of what's called a boleto, and we'll get to what that is, and finally the signing of the escritura, and we'll get to what that is. Let's begin at the beginning. You make an offer. Step number 1. You when you make an offer, it's similar to what you would expect in other markets. You and your broker will go to the listing agent after you've seen scores and scores of places. You might land on a place you'd like. You say, well, I really like this place. Let's make an offer on it. Asking price is, let's say, $200,000. You will make an offer for $160,000. So what you'll do is a letter of intent will be drafted. That's called a seña. It's tantamount to a letter of intent or an offer saying, I hereby offer the amount of 160 for the property located on such and such a street. And of course, I'm doing this in a reductionist fashion, but there is a document that is drafted, and you know, you want to make sure you've got a broker on your end who is looking out and making sure that all the T's are crossed and all the I's are, of course, dotted. Monetary sum varies based on the amount of money of the property, but the monetary sum basically tells the other broker, hey, you know what, put your money where your mouth is. If you're interested in making an offer, put some money down. You put that money down, and the other side may or may not accept that offer. So what happens after you've made the offer? Typically, one waits 2 days, 3 days until a reply is given. And here we've got 4 options. The offer is accepted, which would be wonderful. The offer is rejected. The offer is countered. Or the offer is accepted, but at the 11th hour, for whatever reason, you've determined you no longer want to buy a place in Buenos Aires. You've thought about it, and you'd rather buy a Ferris wheel in Hawaii. I don't know. You want to buy something else, or your significant other has talked you out of it, or, you know, just whatever reason. So if the offer is accepted, wonderful, you're off to the races. The offer is rejected, you can circle back and make another offer, or keep seeing what else there might be out there. The offer is countered, as you might expect. They'll say, well, you know what, 160 is too low, but can you make it to 175? And at that point, you can say yes or no. If you say yes to that, you're back to number 1 and you're off to the races, and the counter offer is accepted. Now, options 1, 2, and 3 call for you getting your money back if any of those situations arise. If you make an offer, the offer is accepted, and you go back and decide you don't want to buy, that is the only case in which you lose your money. That money is lost and goes to the owner, with part of it going to the broker more often than not, but mainly the owner. So that's a good thing to know, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in many other places in the world, but that's the only situation in which you have, if you will, a risk of losing money. So let's go for best case scenario. You've made an offer, the offer has been accepted, and traditionally what happens is you go to the signing of a document prior to the deed. The deed, of course, is the final step, and the step in which you know, both parties sign, money is given to the seller, the keys are given to the buyer, and everybody pats themselves on the back, and you've got a new home. Now, prior to that, traditionally, there has been a step in the middle, which is the signing of the boleto. The signing of the boleto also acts as a letter of intent, which it gives both parties more time before the signing of the deed to either get the money to the country or get the money from wherever they need to get the money, or maybe they've got upcoming surgery, so they need a couple of extra weeks, and it solidifies the deal. And in that solidifying of the deal, the buyer typically pays 30 or 35% of the price of the property. And sometimes it's negotiated that possession is given to the buyer at that juncture. Seldom happens, but it can be negotiated. So it acts as a way of setting forth parameters for the signing of the deed. Parameters such as the date of payment, method of payment, where it's going to be signed, and any other particulars or details that need to be addressed. A lot of the things that govern real estate and real estate transactions, believe it or not, aren't law, but rather custom. For example, the city of Buenos Aires, both parties pay a commission, which I believe is different in the United States. A buyer will pay 4%, seller will pay 3%, 2%, 3%, depending. And that is governed by tradition and set forth by USICBA, which is the Association of Realtors in the city of Buenos Aires. Province of Buenos Aires, for example, in contrast, has it set forth by law. But that's neither here nor there. It's just by way of saying that a lot of the things that govern these transactions are tradition and what is typically done. And so therefore they can be negotiated a lot of the times. Okay, signing of the boleto. Let's move to the signing of the escritura, which is the final step, and it is essentially the deed, the signing of the deed. Now, in a real estate transaction, the first line of defense is your broker. He's the one or she's the one who's going to ideally look out for your interests, negotiate as best a price as is possible, negotiate the best conditions. Even though always remember that I've always thought that a good deal is the one in which both parties leave the table a little unfulfilled. So you got to give a little, you got to take a little. So it's never going to be 100% what you wanted, be it price, be it timetable, be it who's going to be the notary who represents the deal. There's any number of factors, and there's a whole ecosystem of people that work in a real estate transaction, and we will get to that. But let's talk about the notary for a moment. The notary public, or escribano as they're called here, is a completely different person in terms of responsibility in Argentina, as opposed to the United States. In the United States, it's easy enough to become a notary, and you basically, if I'm not mistaken, affix your signature and a seal to a document. Just to give you an example, the city of Buenos Aires has about 40,000 licensed lawyers, approximately 8,500 licensed real estate professionals, and about 6,000 licensed notaries public. The reason for that is it's because it's exceedingly difficult to become a notary public in Argentina. If the broker is the first line of defense in terms of making sure all the due diligence is adequate and apt and you don't run into any trouble, then the notary public or escribano is your last line of defense. He is the one who is completely responsible for making sure that all the deeds that came before the deed you're going to sign have the correct information, that all the taxes are paid for, that the person who is selling is who he says, that he's got no liens or embargoes on his person. Basically, he is the one that guarantees that the deal go through without a hitch. That's why he is of the utmost importance. And that is why when you choose a notary, I guess like in any walk of life, but when you choose a notary, you want to make sure it's someone that you know, that you trust, and that you're comfortable with. Just a very quick sidebar. Escrow in Argentina. The institution of escrow in Argentina does not exist. And I'll say this again, it does not exist. There is no impartial, objective, third-party organization which will hold the money or hold the deed. Both parties come together, both parties negotiate. one party sends the money over, the other party accepts the money, or it is done cash on the barrelhead. And this is all part of a balance of trust and a balance of the due diligence that is done to make sure that neither buyer nor seller have any problems. We've had cases where we have all but advised the client not to move forward with a real estate deal. And again, to our detriment, because that's how we make our money. But we've had to say, look, let's let this one go. Let's keep on looking for another one. Or, hey, this guy he wants a certain amount of time. I don't think that's in your best interest. So there are things which have to be agreed upon, and many times they have to be agreed upon in writing and with a notarial seal, just to give everybody more proof that that everything is being done as by the book as is possible. You know, it's important to know, it's important to understand that the LOI, it can be as detailed or not as you like. The two important factors of an LOI from a legal standpoint are that they become binding, of course, but for them to become binding, they have to be legally possible and physically possible. What does this mean? Legally possible indicates that I can't draft a contract with someone saying that I promise to kill 5 people every month. It's not legal. It has to be physically possible. So I can't draft a contract indicating that I will procure and sell flying elephants because they don't exist. So moving right along, there is an alternative. I had indicated before that the 4-step process can be brought down to 3 steps. You can skip over or eschew the 3rd step, the signing of the boleto, and go straight to the signing of the escritura. In Argentina, typically we refer to this as ir a escritura directa, which really means nothing more than jumping over step number 3 and going from 2 to 4. Most, if not all, brokers will want to first go through step number 2 and go through the boleto, because in that step, which is the 35% that the buyer pays the seller, is also when the broker collects his commission. So obviously, like anybody, people want to charge for their work sooner rather than later. I'm no exception. However, we recommend waiting a bit more, and if at all possible, going straight to the signing of the escritura. And the reason for that is just one very important, although rarely seen possibility, which is you sign the letter of intent and you pay 35%. And let's say that in the interim, the seller dies or becomes physically incapacitated. Best case scenario, he's got next of kin who can take over the deal, but that's going to take a while between all the legal steps, probate, lawyers, etc. Worst case scenario, there's no next of kin, or even worse, there is next of kin and they don't want to move forward with the deal. What happens to that 35% that you put down? Let's say it's $100,000, 35% being $35,000. What happens to that money? Thankfully, it's not something that's ever happened to me, so I can't really answer that question. But these are the kinds of things that you seek to avoid. And as such, we recommend going straight to the deed, which sometimes ruffles feathers in some colleagues, but we feel it's the cleanest way of getting from A to B. So let's talk a little bit about money. Real estate transactions are, for the most part, handled in cash here in Argentina. Think of those old John Wayne or Clint Eastwood movies where they would walk into the bar with the bags with cash, a little dollar sign in them. Yeah, it's kind of sort of like that in a way. It's done with cash. Not all the time. And our office tries to do it also in different ways, and we have other suggestions to that. But your options when you buy real estate in Argentina are usually 3. First one is transfer from an overseas account to an overseas account, and it presents as the safest, least expensive, and least cumbersome or problematic way. Now, this is what usually happens when we have a foreign buyer and a foreign seller, or a foreign buyer and a local seller, or vice versa, but both of whom have access to overseas accounts. These days in Argentina, a sizable amount of people have overseas accounts. That's option number one. Option number two is make a transfer from an overseas account. Let's say we have a buyer who is from the United States, seller is from Argentina. The buyer will open up an account in Argentina. He will send the money from his account in, say, HSBC in Miami, Florida, to HSBC to his name in Buenos Aires, Argentina. That money will be converted to Argentine pesos, taxed, converted back to US dollars. Now, this is the way to do it if you are doing it 100% by the book and declaring that money through the bank. Now, you can also declare the money, of course, legally, which is, needless to say, our suggestion and the way to do it, going through other channels. But this is the most by the book, squeaky clean channel to utilize for the purposes of getting money into the country. You may ask, can I bring the money in a bag when I travel next from Miami? You can. You are legally allowed to bring in $9,999 before the government asks you any questions, both your government and our government. Can you come into the country without them knowing that you've got the money? Sure, you can do that. Is it recommended? No, it's not recommended. And best case, even if they don't catch you, you always run the risk of getting, mugged, held up, what have you. It shouldn't happen. No one would know you've got the money, but it's an unnecessary risk. So let's move to option number three. Option number three is what, for better or worse, many clients in the past have used, which is an under the radar way of getting the money into the country, which you can afterwards declare to the government. And it's basically using a finance firm, which facilitates the process. What happens is they will say to you, you'll say to them, I need to get $100,000 for purchase of property into Argentina next week. And they'll give you a routing number, an account number to where you have to send that money. And they will facilitate the cash here in Argentina in cash. Now you may say, whoa, what proof do I get of this? And how do I know the money's going to be here? So again, back to knowing who you're working with, you've got to talk to people and do research and find out who does this, who is reputable, and who is not going to leave me dangling in the wind. And again, for better or for worse, this presents as the pragmatic approach of getting the money here for the purposes of buying real estate. Potential pitfalls and problems. Once you've done most, if not all, of the due diligence, and if we were your broker, we sit and we discuss we give you our feedback in terms of an apartment or a house you may have seen, or a commercial piece of real estate you may have seen. The most common issue that people run into is iffy paperwork. And I say it's a risk, but not really a risk, because the original letter of intent that you draft in Latin has a clause which is ad referendum, which basically means that we will move forward if and only if there are no outstanding issues with this property. So we put some money down on the purchase of a property that you may like. And if the paperwork comes back with red flags, then the other broker is legally mandated to return your money. So you're not at that much risk right there. Hidden issues with a property, in Spanish referred to vicios ocultos or vicios redimitorios. Basically, a guy says to you, I'm selling you my house, it's in perfect condition. You're happy, you bought it. Down the line, you realize it had asbestos. Huge problem. They didn't disclose it. They should have disclosed it. Obviously, you can sue, but the process of suing in Argentina It's not quite so clear cut as it is in the United States. So rather than going down that avenue, we have people that we work with, such as engineers, contractors, architects, people who know about property, especially when it's older property, so as to recommend whether to move forward or not based on potential problems that the property might have. And here again, we have no qualms about telling our client, it's been brought to my attention that this property has, there's this water stain and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So I'm not sure about this place, but at the end of the day, the decision is the client's. And we've had clients say, yeah, I want to buy it anyways. And that's fine. All we do is guide in the process. And at the end of the day, the client makes as informed a decision as they can. So we had talked about different players in a real estate deal. There is an ecosystem which is created. You've got the buyer in the middle. And if we're going counterclockwise, you've got the listing agent, let's call it Remax, an office that I might call and say, hey, I've got a place I'd like to see, or you've got a place I'd like to see for a client of mine, John Doe, and they'll show it to us and you may like it and you may want to move forward. We got the notary who's going to do all the due diligence pertaining to, when the deed will be drafted, what the amount to be paid is going to be, and a slew of other aspects. You got the lawyer, architect, and engineer. Why a lawyer? Because there may be a probate issue in the middle. Maybe the owner currently died and it's going through probate court. Probate will be done within a month or two. So maybe you need to get a lawyer involved just to make sure that everything goes through without a hitch. Architect and engineer, as we discussed just previously, the fact that the property may or may not have any issues, structural or otherwise. Buyer's broker, in this example, would be us or anyone that you trust that you work with, which would be looking out for your interest and making sure that everything previous or everything prior to that is being encompassed. So the buyer's broker acts as an umbrella for all the other professionals. And finally, the accountant. The accountant is going to recommend your accountant in the States or wherever you're from, and your accountant here is going to recommend which way to do the transaction, or if you have to sign up for any specific type of tax ID, or signing up for the tax ID that you need, which we had mentioned is called a CDI. So realistically, all things being equal, real estate transaction can take anywhere between 10 and 15 days, but as little as 10 days. We don't have the 30-day escrow where, as we had mentioned, the inspector comes along and everybody's kind of on pins and needles. In the event the other guy, decides not to buy, or something turns out to be off in the property, both parties agree, and it can take as little as 10 days. So numbers. Let's talk a little bit about numbers. Up until now, this has all been theory, and this has been the textbook scenario. So let's talk a little bit about numbers. Price per square meter is the way that we measure value of property in any specific area. If an apartment usually goes for, let's look at the middle, May 2013. Generally, for the city of Buenos Aires, $1,887 was the norm in May of 2013, when you take an average of all the areas of the 23 districts, I believe there are, in the city of Buenos Aires. If you see something for 1820, that will be considered a deal. If you see something for 1950, it'll be overpriced. But of course, this is all subjective, because maybe it's at 1950 because it's a newer building, or maybe it's got a car space. And by the same token, maybe it's at 1820 because it needs a lot of work and it has to be just completely gutted. And this first chart gives you an idea of what the market's been doing from 2018-19 moving forward, which is when we started to see, we had already seen a decline in real estate transactions, But 2018, 2019 is when it really started to turn into a veritable buyer's market. Now, this is also interesting. This charts sales done with mortgages. We don't have mortgages here hardly at all, as evidenced by the fact that if you look at 2019, 20, 21, 22, they've been all but non-existent. And mind you, this is for the entire country of 50 some odd million people, economically active, let's call it 30 million. 2017 and 18 were the last two good years of mortgages. Up until 2012, 13, we had some ideas, some government sanctioned plans and ideas for creating mortgage plans, but they were unsuccessful. So historically, for the most part, the only way of buying real estate has been, again, cash on the barrelhead. And what's the current state of the Argentine real estate market? Let's take this website, which is the website that is primarily used by brokers and people who are looking to buy alike. And let's call it Exhibit A. The website, in case anybody wants to jot it down, is sonaprop.com.ar. And it's pretty much like saying Zillow. You go on Zillow and you look for an area, or you look for bedrooms, or you look for a price range. So when this was done, just very recently, there were 96,556 apartments, 566 apartments for sale in the city of Buenos Aires, all told. 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, studio, pool, no pool, what have you. Now, mind you, this can change on a daily basis. This is a snapshot from the Colegio de Escribanos de la Ciudad de Buenos Aires, which is the Association of Notaries Public of the city of Buenos Aires. They had the following information. For December of 2022, there had been 4,253 deeds signed in the city of Buenos Aires for a total of 72 billion pesos. Let's call that Exhibit B. So what does that mean? Well, when you've got 96,566 properties for sale in the city of Buenos Aires, against the backdrop of 4,253 that were sold in December of 2022, that translates into 4.41% of everything that's in the market just being sold. Now, it's true that there are two things that sell real estate. It's really not it's not rocket science. The reality is, if you've got a product which is adequately marketed with good pictures, with a good description, in good websites, and some money is put into the marketing department of your real estate firm, and the fact that it's at a market price, then more likely than not, you'll sell it fairly quickly. But having said that, this is the state, this is the abysmal state of what is now a fourth year of a buyer's market. And going back to what we discussed of prices per square meter, we've got Recoleta, which, and this is taken from also the same website, Reporte Inmobiliario, which tells you what the square meter is doing right now in Recoleta, which is one of the main, for those of you who are not familiar with Buenos Aires, one of the main areas of interest for foreign investment and tourism. Palermo, and there are several Palermos. Palermo, as you can see, is one of the largest, if not the largest, areas of the city of Buenos Aires. And a number of years ago, it was subdivided and became more hip to the tune of changing names. There's a Palermo Hollywood, there's a Palermo Soho, there's a Palermo Chico, there's a Palermo Nuevo. But that gives you an idea globally of what the square meter does in Palermo. San Telmo, which is another very popular area, one of the least expensive areas in terms of cost per square meter. There's more of a housing deficit in San Telmo. It's harder to find certain things, and there's no more construction going on in San Telmo. And a lot of people, a sizable amount of people, like San Telmo because it presents a more bohemian feel to it. Belgrano is slightly more residential, further up north, but is also an area which is, we've seen lately, presents more interest to people looking to buy for whatever reason. And because public transportation is very good in the city of Buenos Aires, It's basically a stone's throw from other areas of town, as well as the province of Buenos Aires. Now, Puerto Madero is interesting because it is as far removed from anything in Buenos Aires you might find. You go to Puerto Madero and it's where all the high rises are, the skyscrapers. It's the new up and coming area. It's the most expensive area per cost per square meter. But our experience over the years has been that there is very little interest in Puerto Madero because it's like any other first world city you might real estate you might encounter. Houston, Austin, Dallas, Miami, pockets of New York City. So people come to Buenos Aires or invest in Buenos Aires for many reasons, not least of which is the architecture and the style and the old Parisian or European feel to it, which Puerto Madero does not have. So that's all well and good. But as an investor, as a buyer, or someone who's interested, what can I do with the money that I have? What kind of purchasing power do I have? So let's talk Turkey. And this, by the way, is a townhouse, the equivalent of a brownstone, purchased recently by a client of mine from Seattle, a four-step, a four-floor, which has been sold completely turnkey at a steal, just at a steal. Guy reached out to me to help him with the purchase. And the first thing I did was I called the other broker and I said, what's the catch? How can this be so cheap? And it was just one of those once in a lifetime things where the seller was very, very motivated. He had real estate in the US and real estate in other areas of the country. And he just wanted to sell. He was pushing 80. He couldn't do the upkeep anymore. And so sold it. My client snatched it up. And it's I mean, this is just one picture, but it's a pretty impressive 100-year-old house in the center of Recoleta. So these are a few examples of comps around town in three areas which are of interest to both locals and foreigners alike. A studio in Recoleta could run you at $95,000, one bed, one bath, $125,000, two bed, two bath, $165,000. Now, for the purpose of all of these examples, if you turn back the clock 2, 3, 4 years, or maybe even less than that, 2 years, year and a half, you would have to add another 10% or 15% to these prices. But one of the reasons for that is many sellers are not motivated. In fact, the irony of sellers is that more often than not, they don't have a rush to sell. And so they will do the classic wait and see. As a broker, I might say to them, let's take the studio in Recoleta. That's the example of a guy who had it at $145,000. I told him, we're never going to sell it at that price, not at this market. So for a long while, he said, well, I'll just wait until the right person comes along. And we waited, and the right person never came along. And so finally, he was a bit more motivated, and we brought down the price, and eventually it was sold. Same situation with other units. Now, when you take these numbers and you compare them to the cost of real estate in, let's just limit ourselves to the United States, other world-class cities such as Houston, Austin, Miami, New York, Los Angeles, what have you, you can probably agree that the price differential is quite substantial. So I will leave you with what Mark Twain said, which is buy land. They're not making it anymore. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and thank you for coming in. And I do see that I have some questions in the Q&A. I don't know if Rod, do you want me to go to that, or
let me just jump in and maybe summarize a few. I don't think we'll have time for all of them, but I gathered some of them, and I'll just ping them back to you. So very good presentation, Max. Congratulations, really very well deployed. Three things that I gathered from the questions that I've been reading on the audience that may differ from our market here when we execute a transaction in the U.S. The first one is the cost of carry of the property in Argentina versus the U.S. In the U.S., you know, we have a big burden, which is property taxes and insurance for the property. Maybe you can give some color on the difference of, or at least as a percentage of the value of the property. What are you thinking of if you were to buy a property full cash? What would be that cost of carry?
I can't speak to the percentage, but it's woefully low. I always tell people that when you're investing in real estate in Argentina, the big amounts of money that you're paying are the actual cost of the property, the fees to the broker, the fees to the notary, and everything else considered in Argentine pesos is very low. Let me just give you, I mean, so that the answer is not ambiguous. For the purposes of a studio apartment that we have in Palermo, Hollywood, which rents very well, and actually an American gentleman is the owner, that unit, which has a small gym, a small pool, and security in a very good location, about 500 square feet, pays 24,000 pesos a month in homeowners association bills, which is 3 times 3 isn't it? It's how much is that? It's if you divide that by almost 400 pesos or 300 pesos, if you want to round down, it's substantially lower than what you might expect to pay in the United States. And the same applies for water bill, light bill, and the only other tax you pay is you can call it street sweeping. It's called ABL in the city of Buenos Aires, which is a mix of both the street sweeping and lighting and the tax on the property. And there again, you're paying something like, I may be exaggerating, but let's call it $400 a year on that. When you think of it in pesos, if you're making your money in dollars, everything that comes after the purchase of property is completely manageable and you know, not expensive at all.
Okay. Yeah, so just that's very, very useful. Just I think that's a big difference in regards to property in the US. Just for sake of example, if you had a $500,000 property, you will be thinking at least 2-3% of the property value in property taxes, and then maybe another half a point for insurance. So here sounds like you're well below the 1% of the property value.
Yeah, again, the big monies to lay down are in the actual process when you're buying, when you're paying the broker, when you're paying the notary, when you're paying, you know, any fees for transferring money. But everything that comes after that, because of the fact that the peso is so weak against the US dollar, is even with inflation, and Argentina, of course, is no stranger to inflation. Even with that, it's nothing to write home about.
Okay. Another question, Max, is gathered from the audience is typically how long does the process take from offer to closing? In the US, you may think with financing around 45 days. What does that look like in Argentina?
Well, first of all, because there is no financing, it can be as quickly as 10 days. If we've got a guy who has the money, all he needs to do is Zelle the money from his account to the seller, or he's got the cash here in Buenos Aires, and the seller is motivated and ready and doesn't have to buy anything to move into, then there's no reason why, if you get a notary worth his weight in money in gold, it can be done within 10 days, 15 days on the outside. There are instances in which it can take longer, or as both parties determine that they need some more time, it can take longer. We've had cases of people saying, let's do the LOI right now, but I have to travel back to the US for the holidays, so let's meet again in February for the final signing. And if both parties agree to that, then that's fine. But barring any unforeseen issues with the county registrar's office or anything like that, a week to 10, let's call it 10 days, 15 days, it should be done.
Okay. There's another question, and I think you touched a little bit during the presentation that differs from the process in the US. Who pays the broker fees, and at which stage of the process is paid?
Yeah, I think we briefly touched upon that because I know it's different in the United States, to where the buyer, I believe, is the only one who
The seller.
Or I'm sorry, the seller pays the fees. In Argentina, both parties pay a fee, unless for whatever reason it can be negotiated. But traditionally, in the city of Buenos Aires, the seller pays 3% or 2%, as the case may be, and the buyer will pay 4%. So both parties will pay a commission to the broker. And as to when, it is done either at the time the boleto, which is the third step in the process, is done, where 35% of the money is paid. At that point, the buyer will pay the 35% of the property value to the seller and will pay the 4% to the broker.
Perfect. One last one, and it's probably a little bit too legal, but somebody in the audience asked about the mandatory disclosures. Can you speak a little bit about the mandatory disclosures? Somebody asked about the statute of limitations. How long can you go back and claim if something was not disclosed when you purchase a property?
In terms of the purchase of property?
Yeah.
I get, there's a question similar to that we get, which is, do they talk to their accountants in the States? And I always mention the States because that's primarily our niche, but do they talk to their accountants in the States? Do they not? Now, legally, in a perfect world, you would declare the purchase of property to your accountant in the States and to your accountant here to pay those taxes. There isn't such a thing as a statute of limitations. Ideally, you want to declare it and you want to start paying taxes. The taxes that you pay on the property are the ones that we mentioned, which are really not that much. And then there are taxes that you may or may not pay personally for having property, either personal wealth or tax, or if you've got a car plus a property plus a boat, whatever taxes have to be paid based on based on the entirety of the things you own in Argentina. And those have to be declared to the Argentine government and to the US government, or to the government where you might be from. But there isn't a statute of limitations to where if you haven't done it before a year, X will happen. And X will happen in the sense that you will have punitive cost added to the tax that you should have paid, but the manpower is limited, so they're not going to be after you and looking for you under the bed, waiting to see if you paid or not your yearly taxes.
One last one, Max. Is the process in Buenos Aires similar, or are there any differences in other cities in Argentina?
It's the same. It's the same from a legal standpoint, but when you get into other cities in Argentina, a lot of the time it becomes customarily different. We have, for example, the case of a gentleman from France who's buying a farmland in Santiago del Estero, which is up north. And this creates a different cultural timetable. Many times there isn't a deed for a lot of plots of land as you go deep into the interior of Argentina. Plots of land or other pockets of land are sold not by way of a deed, but by way of what's called cesión de derechos, which is giving the rights to the property, but not through a deed. Does that mean that you're the owner? Yes, it does. Does it mean that that it's perfected 100%? No, it doesn't, because there isn't a deed in the middle. So that many times creates potential for risk. So in those instances, we don't recommend people making a purchase if there isn't paperwork that that can be proven to be accurate or thorough.
Perfect. All right. I think we are right on time, Max. We're at almost an hour. Nothing, just to summarize, thank you very much. Extremely informative, very relevant information if for anyone that is planning a transaction in Argentina. Just to close, thank you to you, Max, for volunteering your time. Your contact will be available in the recording of the webinar if anyone wants to contact you. Thank you for the audience for participating. There was a lot of participation today. There was a lot of folks joining the webinar. Happy to see that. And finally, thank you to the staff of the Chamber of Commerce that make this educational series possible. With that said, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Max.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.